It started with an envelope, plain brown and creased at the edges. It had been left on my desk without so much as a note. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. Just another anonymous tip, one of many that crossed my path as a private investigator. But as I opened it and pulled out the contents, I realized this wasn't just any ordinary lead. Inside was a map, yellowed with age, its edges frayed. Strange symbols were scribbled in the corners, and faded lines crisscrossed the parchment like veins. Something about it felt wrong, as though it had been waiting for someone foolish enough to follow its trail. The sender's identity remained a mystery. No return address, no accompanying letter, just a map and a single word written on the back, Ravenwood. The name rang faintly familiar, like a tune I couldn't quite place, but the details eluded me. I reached for my notebook and jotted it down, knowing better than to dismiss an instinct. My name is Adrian Voss. I've spent over 2 decades untangling other people's messes, digging into the shadows where no one else dared. Missing persons, corporate espionage, and the occasional infidelity case. I've seen it all. But as I traced my finger over the faded ink of the map, I knew this was different. This wasn't just a job. It was an invitation to something far darker. I spread the map out under the warm glow of my desk lamp, studying its every detail. The symbols were peculiar, almost arcane, as if lifted from the pages of an old alchemy book. Circles, arrows, and cryptic notation surrounded a jagged line that appeared to mark a path. At the bottom of the map, a set of coordinates was etched faintly, as though someone had tried to erase them. They pointed to a location deep in the woods just outside the city, an area I knew had been abandoned for years. The name Ravenwood lingered in my mind. I did a quick search through my files and online databases, but nothing concrete came up. The closest reference was an old property deed tied to a failed land development project from the 1930s. The project had been halted abruptly after the disappearance of its lead architect, a man named Harmon Ellery. Harmon Ellery. That name added another layer to the unease building in my gut. He had been a figure of infamy in his time, rumored to have been involved in illicit activities ranging from smuggling to extortion. Though nothing was ever proven, his vanishing act had left a stain on the Ravenwood name, turning it into the kind of story parents whispered to misbehaving children. The next morning, I decided to follow the trail. Curiosity, I've learned, is both a curse and a gift in my line of work. I packed the essentials, a flashlight, my notebook, and a revolver, just in case. The coordinates led me to the outskirts of town, where the city's concrete arteries gave way to dense forest. The air grew cooler as I drove, the sunlight dimming beneath the canopy of ancient trees. When I arrived, the site was nothing more than a clearing surrounded by towering oaks and tangled underbrush. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it, but as I stepped closer, something metallic caught the light. Half buried beneath a mound of leaves was a rusted box, its lid secured with a padlock. The map symbols had led me here, and I wasn't about to turn back now. It took some effort, but I managed to break the lock. Inside the box was a collection of faded documents, a small leather-bound journal, and a single skeletal hand. My stomach churned at the sight, but I forced myself to focus on the journal. Its pages were brittle, the ink smudged, but one entry stood out. To those who find this, know that Ravenwood is not a place but a warning. The truth is buried in shadows, and the cost of unearthing it will be steep. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced back at the skeletal hand, its bony fingers clutching a crumpled scrap of paper. Carefully, I unfolded it and found a series of numbers, another set of coordinates. I left the clearing with more questions than answers. Back in my office, I pinned a map to the wall beside the journal entry and the new coordinates. My gut told me this was only the beginning, that whoever had sent me the map wanted me to follow these breadcrumbs. But the deeper I went, the more I felt the weight of an unseen force, as though something ancient and malevolent was watching, waiting for me to take the next step. This wasn't just a case. It was a challenge, one I couldn't afford to lose. I didn't know it yet, But Ravenwood's secrets were about to pull me into a web of deception, danger, and darkness far greater than I had ever faced. The coordinates from the scrap of paper led me deeper into the mystery. As I drove out of the city and into the countryside, the landscape changed. The sprawling suburbs gave way to rolling fields, and soon even those disappeared, replaced by dense woods on either side of the narrow, winding road. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly into the trees. The air grew cooler, and a faint sense of unease settled over me. I had learned to trust that feeling. It often meant I was getting close to something important. The location turned out to be an abandoned library, its faded sign barely legible through the overgrowth that had claimed the once pristine facade. The building was a relic of another era, with its neoclassical columns and cracked stone steps leading to a pair of heavy oak doors. One of the doors hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I parked the car and approached cautiously, the weight of my revolver reassuring against my side. The interior of the library was a tomb of forgotten knowledge. Rows of bookshelves stretched into the shadows, their contents coated in a thick layer of dust. The faint smell of mildew hung in the air, mingling with the unmistakable scent of aged paper. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I moved through the aisles, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The light played over titles that hadn't been read in decades, their spines faded and cracked. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Near the center of the library, a small reading table was covered in an array of objects that didn't belong. A lantern, still faintly warm, suggested someone had been here recently. Papers were scattered across the surface, along with a worn leather notebook and an old key. The notebook's cover was embossed with a familiar set of initials, H.E. Harmon Ellery. My pulse quickened as I flipped it open. The entries were erratic, filled with ramblings about betrayal codes and something called the Vault. One passage stood out. The Vault is the heart of Ravenwood. Its secrets are protected by the cipher, and only the worthy can unlock it. The clues are hidden in the echoes of the past, in the places where shadows linger. The words were underlined several times, as if Ellery himself had wanted to ensure they couldn't be overlooked. The notebook's final pages contained a series of complex symbols and numbers, arranged in what appeared to be a puzzle. It was intricate, layered, and designed to frustrate anyone who dared to solve it. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far larger than I'd anticipated. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of movement. It was faint, coming from somewhere deeper in the library, but unmistakable. I froze, my hand instinctively going to my revolver. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. Slowly, I made my way toward the source of the noise, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. I found myself in a section of the library that had partially collapsed. Debris littered the floor, and the shelves were warped and leaning precariously. At the far end of the room, I caught a glimpse of a figure moving between the shadows. Whoever it was, they were careful to stay out of the beam of my flashlight. "I know you're there," I called, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my chest. "Show yourself." There was no response, but the figure didn't retreat. Instead, they stepped closer, just enough for the light to catch the edge of their silhouette. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by a hood, but I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Turn back before it's too late." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my revolver at the ready. "What do you know about Harmon Ellery?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he hurled something to the ground between us, a small, cylindrical object. I barely had time to register what it was before it detonated, filling the room with a blinding flash of light and a deafening bang. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes as the sound reverberated through the library. When the disorientation subsided, the man was gone. The only sign of his presence was a faintly scorched patch on the floor where the flashbang had gone off. I cursed under my breath, my ears still ringing as I surveyed the room. Whoever he was, he had been watching me, and he knew more about Ravenwood than he let on. I returned to the reading table, determined not to leave empty-handed. The key and the notebook were too valuable to ignore, and I carefully tucked them into my bag. As I did, I noticed something I'd overlooked earlier, a slip of paper wedged between the pages of the notebook. It was a letter, written in a hurried scrawl. To the one who finds this, beware the vault. It is a trap as much as it is a treasure. Trust no one, for even shadows can betray. The warning sent a shiver down my spine. Ellery's paranoia was palpable, but it was hard to dismiss as mere rambling. I left the library with a growing sense of urgency, the weight of the notebook and key pressing heavily against my side. As I drove back toward the city, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky. The road ahead seemed longer than before, and the shadows at its edges felt alive with unseen movement. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the man in the library wasn't working alone. The vault was no longer just a mystery to solve. It was a danger I had willingly stepped into. Back in my office, I spread out everything I'd collected so far. The map, the notebook, the key, and the slip of paper. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the picture they formed was far from clear. Ellery's cipher was the key to unlocking the truth, but it was also a labyrinth designed to keep intruders out. I knew that solving it would take me further down a path I couldn't turn back from. As I stared at the scattered clues, a single thought kept echoing in my mind. What if this wasn't just about Ravenwood? Into a web of deception, danger, and darkness far greater than I had ever faced. The next step in unraveling the cipher's mystery took me to an industrial wasteland on the outskirts of the city. The key I had retrieved from the library was old and rusted, but its design was unmistakable. It belonged to a lock far more complex than any common padlock. The notebook from Harmon Ellery had mentioned a vault, and after cross-referencing the map, I identified a location marked with faint coordinates. It led me here to what looked like the remnants of an abandoned warehouse. As I parked my car near the site, the air grew heavy, laden with the scent of oil and decay. The skeletal remains of steel beams jutted out from the earth like broken ribs, and shattered glass crunched beneath my boots as I made my way toward the structure. The building loomed in front of me, its facade marred with graffiti and time's relentless erosion. Somewhere inside lay the next piece of the puzzle, though I had no illusions about the dangers that might accompany it. The main entrance was sealed with a heavy steel door, its surface tarnished with rust. As I examined it, I noticed faint scratches near the lock, recent ones. Someone had been here before me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I pressed on, inserting the key into the lock. It turned with a reluctant groan, and the door swung inward, revealing a cavernous interior shrouded in darkness. The beam of my flashlight swept across the space, illuminating long-forgotten machinery and piles of debris. The air was thick with dust, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere deeper within. I moved cautiously, my senses on high alert. Every creak of the floor beneath me, every distant sound, felt amplified in the oppressive silence. About 20 feet in, I found a set of stairs descending into the ground. The concrete steps were worn, their edges crumbling, and a faint draft wafted up from below, carrying with it a metallic tang. I hesitated, the weight of the revolver at my side a reassuring presence. Then, gripping the handrail, I began my descent. The stairs led to a narrow corridor, its walls lined with rusted pipes and exposed wiring. The air grew colder as I moved deeper, and the sound of my footsteps seemed to echo endlessly. At the end of the corridor was another door, smaller than the first, but equally sturdy. This one bore a symbol etched into its surface, a circle bisected by a jagged line, identical to one of the markings on the map. I placed my hand against the cold metal and pushed. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a loud groan. Beyond the door lay what could only be described as a vault. The room was circular, its walls lined with shelves that reached up to the low ceiling. Each shelf was filled with objects, Jars of strange substances, locked boxes, and books so old their spines had fused with dust. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small chest secured with yet another lock. This was it. This was what Ellery's notes had been leading to. As I approached the chest, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It wasn't just the oppressive atmosphere of the vault. It was a feeling of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the room with my flashlight. Shadows danced across the walls, but there was no one else here. At least, that's what I told myself. The chest's lock was intricate, far more advanced than the one on the warehouse door. I retrieved the key from my pocket, but it didn't fit. Frustration bubbled up as I examined the chest, searching for any other way to open it. That's when I noticed a small inscription along its edge. "Only the worthy shall see the truth." I stepped back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about having the right key. There was another layer to this puzzle, another test. I returned to the shelves, scanning their contents for anything that might provide a clue. My fingers brushed over the spine of a thick tome, its leather cover etched with the same symbol as the door. I pulled it free and opened it carefully, its pages brittle with age. The text was handwritten, filled with diagrams and cryptic notes. One passage caught my attention. "The truth lies in the alignment of past and present. Time is the key." The phrase repeated several times throughout the book, accompanied by sketches of clocks and constellations. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. I returned to the chest, examining it more closely. Sure enough, there was a faint etching of a clock face on its surface, the hands pointing to 12 and 3. I glanced at my watch. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. Taking a deep breath, I aligned the hands on the chest clock face to match the time. There was a soft click, and the lock released. Inside the chest was a single envelope, sealed with wax and marked with the same symbol that had guided me here. I broke the seal and unfolded the paper within. It contained a single line of text: "To uncover the vault's true purpose, seek the shadow of the raven." Before I could process the meaning, a sound shattered the silence. It was faint at first, a distant scrape of metal, but it grew louder, closer. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The vault's entrance was still open, but the shadows beyond seemed to shift and writhe as if alive. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing in the confined space. There was no response, but the sound continued, deliberate and unrelenting. I backed toward the chest, my hand hovering over my revolver. Whatever was coming, it wasn't friendly. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness and wearing a mask that obscured their face. They moved with purpose, their steps slow and deliberate. In their hand was a knife, its blade catching the light of my flashlight. "You've come too far," they said, their voice distorted by the mask. "This ends here." I drew my revolver, leveling it at the figure. "Stay back," I warned. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." The figure laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea what you stumbled into," they said. "Ravenwood isn't just a name. It's a reckoning." Before I could respond, they lunged. The confined space of the vault turned the confrontation into a chaotic struggle. Shelves toppled, their contents crashing to the floor as we grappled. I managed to knock the knife from their hand, but they were relentless, their movements precise and calculated. Finally, I broke free, raising my revolver and firing a warning shot. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and the figure froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without a word, they turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. I stood there, my heart pounding, the weight of the envelope in my pocket grounding me. Whoever that was, they weren't working alone. Ravenwood's secrets were far from fully uncovered, and the deeper I dug, the more dangerous this game became. As I left the warehouse and stepped into the night, the stars above seemed dimmer, obscured by a gathering fog. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. I wasn't walking away from this. Not now. Leaving the warehouse that night, I felt the weight of the envelope pressing against my chest pocket. The cryptic phrase inside: to uncover the vault's true purpose, seek the shadow of the raven. Asterisk played on repeat in my mind. Who was the masked figure? Why had they warned me or threatened me? And what was this reckoning they had alluded to? The drive back to my office was shrouded in the kind of silence that amplifies every stray thought. The city's skyline emerged through the fog, its lights muted and dim. As I parked and climbed the creaking stairs to my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked the shadows more than once, but there was no one there, or so I thought. Inside, the familiar clutter of my office was a small comfort. The map, the notebook, and now the envelopes that spread out on my desk like pieces of an unsolvable puzzle. I poured myself a drink, the burn of whiskey grounding me as I stared at the cryptic words. The shadow of the raven. It wasn't much to go on, but I had learned to trust that even the smallest clue could lead somewhere significant. I opened the envelope again, studying the wax seal. It bore the same symbol I had seen etched into the vault, a circle bisected by a jagged line. There was something ritualistic about it, something deliberate. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to keep their secrets hidden. I turned to the notebook, flipping through its brittle pages. One entry caught my eye. The shadow of the raven falls where trust is broken, and betrayal is written in stone. The word sent a chill down my spine. Betrayal. The thought lingered as I traced the connections in my mind. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was incomplete, fragmented. I needed more. The next day, I decided to retrace Ellery's steps. If Ravenwood and the cipher were tied to betrayal, then the answers might lie in his past dealings. His name had been associated with a handful of prominent figures during his time. Businessmen, politicians, and criminals who had all seemingly benefited from Ravenwood's secrets. One name stood out among the rest. Victor Grayson, a former associate of Ellery's who had mysteriously disappeared around the same time Ravenwood had been abandoned. Grayson's last known address was an old estate on the outskirts of the city, a place that had since fallen into disrepair. It was said to be cursed, its halls haunted by the ghosts of those who had crossed its threshold. Superstition didn't scare me, but the idea of walking into another trap did. Still, I had no choice. The estate was as foreboding as the rumors suggested. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, the iron rusted and overgrown with ivy. The mansion beyond was a crumbling monolith, its windows dark and empty like hollow eyes. As I stepped through the gate, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Inside, the air was thick with dust and neglect. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step echoing through the empty halls. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down with lifeless eyes. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of the old house settling. I found Grayson's study on the second floor, a room that seemed untouched by time. Papers were scattered across the desk, and shelves lined with books loomed overhead. At the center of the desk was a ledger, its pages filled with names and numbers. Most of it was mundane, business transactions, debts paid and owed, but one entry stood out. Ravenwood final transfer secured in stone. Trust broken. The phrase was underlined twice, and next to it was a symbol I recognized immediately, the circle bisected by the jagged line. Grayson had been involved in whatever Ravenwood had been hiding, but the ledger provided no details. It was another dead end, or so I thought. As I flipped through the ledger, I noticed a faint indentation on one of the pages. Holding it up to the light, I saw the outline of another symbol pressed into the paper. It was a raven, its wings outstretched, perched atop a jagged line. Beneath it were faint letters that spelled out a single word: catacombs. The word struck me like a physical blow. The city's catacombs were a labyrinth of tunnels and forgotten graves, a place where history and decay intertwined. If the shadow of the raven fell anywhere, it was there. Navigating the catacombs was no small task. The entrance I found was hidden behind an old church, its door locked and rusted shut. It took some effort, but I managed to force it open, revealing a staircase that spiraled into the earth. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint smell of damp stone and rot filled my lungs. The tunnels were a maze, their walls lined with ancient carvings and crumbling bones. My flashlight illuminated the path ahead, but the shadows seemed to close in around me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional drip of water. As I moved deeper, I noticed markings on the walls, symbols etched into the stone, identical to those on the map. They guided me through the twists and turns until I reached a chamber at the heart of the catacombs. It was vast. The ceiling lost the darkness, and at its center stood a stone pedestal. Resting atop it was a small box, its surface engraved with the raven symbol. The moment I stepped into the chamber, I felt a presence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I turned, my flashlight sweeping the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by a hood. "You should have stayed away," they said, their voice cold and sharp. "You've gone too far." "Who are you?" I demanded, my revolver already drawn. "What do you know about Ravenwood?" The figure laughed a low, humorless sound. "Ravenwood isn't what you think it is. It's not a place, not a thing. It's an idea, a reckoning." Before I could respond, they lunged. The fight was brutal, the confined space making every movement feel desperate and chaotic. I managed to knock them back, but they recovered quickly, their blade flashing in the dim light. It was only by sheer luck that I disarmed them, sending the knife skittering across the floor. "Who are you working for?" I demanded, pinning them against the wall. But they said nothing, their eyes burning with defiance. In the struggle, they managed to break free, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. I returned to the pedestal, my hands shaking as I opened the box. Inside was another notebook, its pages filled with more of Ellery's cryptic writings. But this time, there was something new, a map of the catacombs, marked with a single point labeled Vault. As I stared at the map, a chilling realization washed over me. This wasn't just about Ellery or Ravenwood or betrayal. This was about something much bigger, something that had been buried for decades but was now clawing its way back to the surface. I left the catacombs with the map clutched tightly in my hand, the shadows of betrayal following close behind. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear that the path I was on was far more dangerous than I had imagined. Emerging from the catacombs, I found myself carrying more than just a map. The shadows of betrayal, the cryptic words from the hooded figure, and the ominous markings from Ellery's notes all weighed heavily on my mind. It was clear that whatever I was chasing wasn't just a simple mystery. Ravenwood was a labyrinth, and each step pulled me deeper into its dark heart. The map I had retrieved from the box in the catacombs pointed to a new location, an abandoned manufacturing plant on the outskirts of the city. The coordinates marked an exact point within the sprawling complex, accompanied by the word Vault. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a feeling that this time, the stakes would be higher than ever. The plant was a monolithic structure, its rusted exterior and shattered windows standing as a testament to decades of neglect. The air around it felt heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I parked my car a safe distance away and approached on foot, my revolver holstered but within easy reach. The map had guided me this far, and now its final riddle demanded to be solved. The interior of the plant was a maze of corroded machinery and crumbling walkways. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavernous space, mingling with the distant creaks of shifting metal. I followed the map's instructions, navigating through the chaos until I reached a massive steel door embedded into the floor. The word Vault was etched into the metal, surrounded by a series of symbols that mirrored those on Ellery's map. The lock mechanism on the door was unlike anything I had seen before. It featured a circular dial with symbols instead of numbers, and a smaller compartment beside it that seemed to require a key. As I examined it, The words from Ellery's notebook came rushing back. The truth lies in the alignment of past and present. Time is the key. I retrieved the notebook from my bag and flipped through its pages, comparing the symbols to those on the lock. It wasn't just a matter of matching shapes. There was a sequence to it, a logic hidden within Ellery's chaotic scribbles. After what felt like an eternity, I turned the dial to the correct alignment. With a click, the mechanism whirred to life, and the smaller compartment opened, revealing a second key, one I had never seen before. The steel door groaned as it slowly slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber below. The air inside was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of metal and earth. I descended a narrow staircase, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. What I found was a room unlike any I had encountered before. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with shelves holding countless artifacts, journals, trinkets, and strange devices whose purposes I could only guess at. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and resting atop it was a sealed container. The container's surface was engraved with intricate patterns, and a plaque beside it bore the words, "To unseal the truth, one must bear the weight of the past." Before I could examine the container further, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and echoing from the staircase I had just ascended. I turned, my revolver drawn, as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same hooded person I had encountered in the catacombs, but this time they weren't alone. Two more figures flanked them, their faces obscured but their intent unmistakable. The leader stepped forward, their voice cold and calm. "You should have stayed away," they said. "Ravenwood secrets aren't meant for people like you." "People like me?" I shot back, my grip tightening on the revolver. "You mean people who aren't afraid to shine a light on the truth?" The leader chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "The truth is a dangerous thing, Mr. Voss. It's a weapon, and in the wrong hands, it can destroy everything. Then why go to such lengths to hide it?" I asked, my eyes darting between the three figures. "If it's so dangerous, why not destroy it?" "Because some things are more valuable than life itself," they replied. "Ravenwood is more than a place or a vault. It's a legacy, one that's been safeguarded for generations. And you've just walked into the lion's den." The next moments were a blur. The figures moved as one, their precision suggesting years of training. I fired a warning shot, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but it did little to deter them. The leader lunged at me, their movements fluid and calculated. I barely had time to react, dodging their strike and retaliating with a swift kick that sent them stumbling back. The other two closed in, forcing me into a corner. I managed to disarm one, sending their weapon clattering to the floor, but the second caught me off guard with a blow to the ribs. Pain shot through my side as I struggled to regain my footing. Desperation fueled my movements as I fought to keep them at bay, each moment a battle for survival. Finally, I saw an opening. Using the pedestal as leverage, I vaulted over it, creating distance between myself and my attackers. I leveled my revolver at them, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Enough!" I shouted. "This ends now." The leader raised their hands in mock surrender, a smirk playing across their lips. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," they said. "But you're in over your head. Ravenwood's secrets are bigger than you, bigger than all of us. Walk away while you still can." "Not a chance," I replied, my voice steady despite the tension in the air. "You want me to walk away? Start explaining what's really going on here." The leader's smirk faltered, their gaze hardening. "You think you've uncovered the truth, but you've barely scratched the surface. Ravenwood isn't just a vault. It's a reckoning. And by the time you realize what that means, it'll be too late." Before I could press them further, the chamber was suddenly bathed in red light. An alarm blared, its shrill tone echoing off the walls. The leader's smirk returned as they backed away, their voice barely audible over the noise. "Time's up, Mr. Voss. Good luck with that." They and their accomplices disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in the chaos. The chamber began to tremble, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. I grabbed the container from the pedestal and sprinted toward the staircase, the map clutched tightly in my other hand. The plant was collapsing around me, the sound of twisting metal and shattering concrete, creating a cacophony of destruction. I navigated the maze of corridors as quickly as I could, the red light guiding my path. By the time I reached the exit, my lungs burned and my heart felt ready to burst. Outside, the night air was a cold relief. I collapsed onto the ground, the container still clutched in my hands. As I looked back at the plant, its structure buckled and crumbled, disappearing into a cloud of dust and ash. Whatever secrets it had held were now buried beneath the rubble. Back in my office, I examined the container in the relative safety of my cluttered desk. The intricate patterns on its surface seemed to shift in the light, and the plaque's words echoed in my mind. To unseal the truth, one must bear the weight of the past. As I prepared to open it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something far greater than I had imagined. Ravenwood's secrets were within my grasp, but at what cost? This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The sealed container sat heavily on my desk, its intricate engravings catching the dim light of the desk lamp. The words on the plaque, to unseal the truth, one must bear the weight of the past. Asterisk echoed in my mind as I prepared to open it. Whatever secrets it held, they had been guarded fiercely. Blood had been spilled, lies had been told, and lives had been destroyed to keep this truth buried. I turned the container over in my hands, searching for a way to open it. Finally, I found a small, concealed mechanism near the base. A faint click resonated as I pressed it, and the lid released with a soft hiss. Inside was a bundle of aged documents, yellowed and fragile, alongside a smaller box, this one made of polished wood. My breath caught as I unfolded the first document. It was a deed, signed by Harmon Ellery himself, detailing the transfer of vast tracts of land under the Ravenwood name. But it wasn't the land itself that caught my attention. It was the note scrawled in the margins. The vault protects the code. The code unlocks the reckoning. Those who seek it must be willing to sacrifice. Beneath the deed was a map, more detailed than the one I'd found earlier. It showed a network of tunnels and chambers that stretched far beyond the catacombs I had explored. At the center was a marked location labeled Ellery's Heart. The name sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a vault. It was a nexus, a place where Ellery's legacy converged. The polished wooden box contained a small key, its design intricate and unique. I recognized it immediately as a match for the safe in the catacombs, the one I had left unopened during my earlier search. It was clear that my journey wasn't over. With the map and key in hand, I prepared to return to the tunnels, determined to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. The drive to the catacombs was uneventful, but the weight of what I carried made every mile feel longer. The city lights faded into the distance as I approached the church that concealed the entrance. The air was colder than I remembered, and a thick mist clung to the ground, muffling my footsteps as I descended into the depths. The catacombs were eerily silent, their labyrinthine passages more foreboding than ever. I followed the new map, navigating through twists and turns until I reached a chamber I hadn't seen before. At its center stood a massive iron safe, its surface adorned with the same symbols that had guided me throughout this case. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and with a deep groan, the safe opened. Inside was a single journal, its leather cover worn, and its pages filled with Harmon Ellery's precise handwriting. The first entry I read was dated just days before his disappearance. To whoever finds this, know that Ravenwood is not merely a vault or a legacy. It is a reckoning for those who betrayed it. The code I have hidden within these pages will reveal the truth, but beware, the truth is not what it seems. As I read further, the full scope of Ellery's plans came into focus. Ravenwood wasn't just a place. It was an intricate system of power and control. Ellery had built it to safeguard secrets that could topple governments and ruin lives. Over time, those entrusted with its care had turned on each other, driven by greed and paranoia. The vault was both a repository of knowledge and a trap, designed to ensure that no one person could wield its full power without paying a steep price. One passage in particular struck me. The reckoning is not mine to deliver. It belongs to those who come after. The shadows of betrayal run deep, and only through sacrifice can they be brought into the light. The words felt like a warning and a challenge. I had come this far, but at what cost? The masked figures, the collapsing plant, the lives lost along the way. They were all part of a larger game, one that I was now deeply entangled in. I left the catacombs with a journal and returned to my office, determined to piece together the final threads of this mystery. The journal's code was complex, but with the other clues I had gathered, I managed to decipher its meaning. It pointed to a hidden account, one that contained vast sums of money and documents implicating powerful figures in crimes that spanned decades. Ravenwood's secrets weren't just historical curiosities. They were weapons, and Ellery had ensured they would fall into the right hands. But as I prepared to report my findings, I noticed something I had missed earlier. The journal's final page contained a single name, one I recognized immediately. It was the masked leader who had confronted me in the vault. They weren't just a guardian of Ravenwood's secrets. They were a betrayer, someone who had turned against Ellery and his vision for their own gain. The revelation set my mind racing. If the masked figure was still out there, then the reckoning Ellery had written about was far from over. The documents and funds I had uncovered were enough to expose a network of corruption, but they were also a target on my back. I had the truth, but the cost of revealing it would be steep. In the days that followed, I watched as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The documents were leaked to trusted journalists, the accounts frozen, and the first arrests made. The shadow of Ravenwood loomed large over the city, and its reckoning had begun. But as I sat in my office, reviewing the case files one last time, a knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. A courier handed me an envelope, its seal unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words, "You're not finished." I stared at the note, the weight of its implications settling over me. Ravenwood's secrets had been exposed, but its shadows remained. Somewhere out there, the masked figure was still watching, waiting for their next move. As I locked the journal away and prepared for what lay ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another case. It was a war, and I was only beginning to understand the battlefield. Ravenwood was behind me, but the future held even darker mysteries. And then the phone rang. "Mr. Voss? We have a situation." "It's complicated." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the urgency was clear. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the night, the city's lights stretching out before me like a labyrinth of possibilities. Whatever this new case was, it promised to be even more dangerous than the last. To find out where this journey leads, join us in the next chapter of this unfolding saga. The answers may be closer than they seem, or perhaps even more elusive. Stay tuned.